Okay, thank you very much. So my title, The Deep Past in the Northern Cape, Archaeological Thoughts on Histories Before History. In a sense, I want to present a bit of a different perspective and a bit of critique this idea of the deep past. And I'm starting, if I may go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to start with this thought of the landscapes being the palimpsest. Now, that's a term that comes from art history, where you can have one image kind of erased, but not completely. And you've got, and then something else gets put on top, and you can end up with shadows and fragments of the earlier layers coming through. And this is very much what one has in landscapes. Any given landscape on Earth would have this quality of palimpsest. So you've got different sort of layers peeking through in different places. I've shown there an image from a helicopter over the Vaal River, and you can see the recent layers of agricultural work on one side. There's erosion on the other bank. Partway down the river from the corner, there's some exposed rock on the left, which is 2,300 million years old. So lots of history is a very deep sense of time if you are able to read the landscape in those terms. So there's bits that are preserved, bits that are erased, some that are peeking out, some covered over. And I've also made the point there that features and creatures all have histories, and these are sometimes rubbed out or overwritten to refer again to that idea of palimpsest. And the traces that we have and that we work with as archaeologists or paleontologists are usually only or often only fossils. They're material things, fossils, debris, or inscriptions such as rock art, which reflect long past human histories in the landscape. In the images there, I've got an 1811 pastoralist settlement on the banks of the same river a bit further downstream, and what we would find today archaeologically are just little traces of stone artifacts and pottery and not very much more. The idea of palimpsest can also be used with reference to stories, fragments of stories that come through to the present from long ago. And there we've got a page from the Blake and Lloyd archive, and then we have a storyteller who is telling similar stories in the recent past. Kabilolo Mahungu, alas, died a few years ago, featuring in that photograph. So I'm going to look at 3 sites as case studies to sketch some of the threads that are emerging of these oldest histories that we have. And I'm going to argue against the idea of deep time and deep past, which can often give a sense of something being very remote from us and from the present, and to talk about them actually being places that give depth to the present, because it's actually in the present that we accumulate, that we do the work, the archaeological work, that we accumulate the stories. Sorry, can we just go to the next slide? Yeah. So it's in the present that we find and piece together these ancient stories, and they can have relevance in the present. And of course, we also need to guard against the ways in which the present bias the way we tell the stories. And if you look at the history of archaeology through the 20th century, it's full of these aspects of bias and the way stories, the archaeological past has been put together in light of the present. And then I refer to Geoff Bailey's concept of a durational present, and he poses the problem as to what is the present? Where does the present begin, and where does the future start, and where does the past end? It can be a split second. I often with students pick up, say, a Coke tin in a classroom and say, this is a material trace of the past and therefore is part of archaeology. although archaeology is generally defined as something that begins 100 years ago. But one can talk about the archaeology of the present or the recent past, and there's very exciting work to be done, for instance, with 20th century forced removals and the material traces of that. So the present can theoretically could be squashed into the split second, or it could be expanded. And Geoff Bailey argues for a much expanded durational present to include all the things that we see in these landscape palimpsests. And past, the VC was talking the other evening about the project as giving humanity opportunities to see right back to the Big Bang. And that can become our durational present. If we could go to the next slide, please. So Geoff Bailey makes this very interesting point that, first of all, the past is actually part of our durational present. And then he goes on to say that the greatly expanded time perspective encourages us to envisage a much longer future, one that will also be affected perhaps irreversibly by actions that we take today. Now, we actually live in a world where most people have cell phones, and their sense of the past might not extend much beyond 5 minutes ago, and in consequence, the sense of the future could also be not more than 5 or 10 minutes into the future while you wait for things to be. And he is saying the deeper, so the further we can anticipate the future and think about our impacts on Earth and on people and on the future. The illustrations there I have are from the Wits University Walking Tall Educational Theatre Project, which is organized around the theme of all. It's geared around theatre for schools and drawing on these pasts from sites like Sterkfontein and talking about all sorts of issues, evolution, climate, impact on climate or climate change in general. And so this is just one of the ways in which one can be talking about these ancient pasts in a very current sense, a very relevant sense. At the bottom of that page, I've just indicated some of the kinds of issues that one can be talking about around heritage sites in the Northern Cape. Next slide, please. So the first site I'm going to talk about is Kantinpopi, and I'm not going to go through all the details there. That's just to show that there's been a long history of archaeological engagement with this place called Kantinpopi, which is it's best known as an earlier Stone Age site on the edge of Berkeley West. You could also talk about it as an alluvial diamond mining site. You could talk about it as a site where a particular skull was found, around which there's been a lot of discussion and debate, and overcoming various kind of myths in recent writing. And it also became a proclaimed national monument in 1948, what is now regarded as a heritage site, which has been for Grade 1 National Heritage status. Next slide, please. In 1997, there was a threat of renewed mining, which would have destroyed the archaeological traces there, and that actually led to the first systematic archaeological work by Peter Beaumont in 1998. And then since 2010, there's been a great deal more research at the site, most of it out of Wits University. And with new dating techniques, we now know that the base of the site goes back about 1.7 million years. So if you're talking about deep time, deep history, this is it. If we may go to the next slide, please. So it's not all ancient. In 2015, we stopped off there on the way to another site and discovered that there'd been this illegal sand mining, and inside of that trench we found bits of Chwana pottery and some bone. Next slide, please. And that discovery led to the salvage operation, because it was very likely that the miners, the sand miners, were probably going to destroy even more of it. So within that year of discovery, we actually came up with the idea of establishing Saltplanking University's first archaeological field school at the site. So giving training and rescuing what had already been disturbed and trying to work out what was going on at the site. And that has continued through till 2018, 2019. We had a big conference. 2020 was COVID. And in the interim, what remained of the site has actually been destroyed. But this was a cooperation between SPU and the University of Toronto and the Greg Museum involved as well. Next slide, please. What we actually found was that it wasn't exclusively a late Iron Age Chwana site. We found, along with the ceramics, we found some European porcelain, some glass, we found metal, all within the same archaeological context. And we recently published a paper arguing that this was a contact period site, a kind of hybrid space of the 1870s, and we've been able to document those material cultural objects that come from different kinds of backgrounds, different contexts, all brought together in this one place. And of course, the 1870s was immediately after the discovery of diamonds, and you had this influx of people literally from everywhere. Next slide, please. So this was the 2015 team, SPU students and some students from Canada and others. And the main point I want to make there is now with this recent discovery at the site, we now know that Kanchinkophi in fact covers the entire span of history of that area. And included in that entire span is also the impacts of mining, and nowadays there's dumping of trash from various people in Berkeley West there as well. So there's a 21st century archaeology there as well. Next slide, please. So just to sum up this first case study of Kanchinkophi, I wanted to make 3 points. First of all, one of the current relevances of Kanchinkophi is that heritage is also a resource. We're up against people who are arguing that mining is a good thing, and that it creates jobs and so on and so forth. We wish to make the point that heritage is also a resource that needs to be balanced against mining and development in terms of education, tourism, and I'd also like to bring in the word respect, partly a reference to UWC, which is one of my alma maters. Respice, prospice. Respice refers to looking back, and from that same word comes the word respect, and prospice, looking into the future. So using the past to improve the future. Second point I want to make is that it's as a hybrid space, we can talk about social interaction and between people from different backgrounds who come into an area, and we can talk about that at different levels, different times, and that gives us clues for understanding the shaping of Northern Cape society in the 21st century. And then the third point I want to make on this slide is a point about innovation. The particular stone artifacts that are on the left there, which are very remote in time and quite difficult for the average person to comprehend, but they actually reflect a very interesting innovation in stone tool technology from 1.5 million years ago. And innovation is something that one sees coming up repeatedly in archaeological sites in the Northern Cape. Next slide, please. So in terms of innovation, that's a magnificent earlier Stone Age hand axe that comes from Ketu. And I've often been tempted to put the caption underneath that, made in the Northern Cape, or in fact just made in Ketu. Because if you go to Ketu now, and you go into the shop, there's almost nothing that you'll find on the shelves that's actually made in Ketu. And just to show that there is a history of things being made in the Northern Cape, innovations in the Northern Cape. And down below there, I've got an image of a little boy out near Pofade, who had made this little draat kariki, and it's actually a horse that might have had a trailer as well, one of those big trucks. And there's the spirit of innovation that's in people, and there's no knowing how far that kind of spirit, if it's encouraged and guided and nurtured, can take us. So that's also in woodcraft done innovation. Next slide, please. So now we're moving on to another site called Wonderwerk Cave, which is one of the most extraordinary sites in South Africa and significant internationally. That's the entrance to it, and beneath there I've got a map showing from the entrance on the right. It stretches back 140 meters into the hillside. Next slide, please. So those are just some images from the entrance going back into the cave. We recently built a boardwalk which allows visitors to go right to the back and to experience the site. And I will focus in the following slide on the image at the bottom left. Next slide, please. So this is, in fact, it's right after this, but let's just, so this is what archaeologists have found. Sorry, yeah. So it's a long Stone Age sequence going back nearly 2 million years, so it's even older than Kanchenkopi. And it has a number of milestone events in human history from the site, which I'll highlight one or two of them. It also has a very important paleoclimatic record, which inter alia shows that the normal is always new. Our lifespans are quite short, so that things seem to be kind of the same, but in fact, there's change all the time. Neville Alexander speaks about the importance of change and changeableness and being able to accommodate that in our thinking. And then also there are finger paintings, which I'll touch on just now. Next slide, please. So the first aspect that has made this internationally significant is the dating of the site. And the image there at the bottom left is one of the scientists doing the dating work. It's been found that sequence, which used to be thought to go back 800,000 years, which back in the 1980s, 1990s was mega time into the past, it's now, with improved dating techniques, we now know that it's altogether older than that, 1.9 million. And that actually makes it, because we've also found in those layers of that date, we've found Alderman artifacts, and it makes it the oldest, presently, the oldest known cave used by human ancestors, the oldest known use of the cave by human ancestors on Earth. So it's a very significant site in those terms, and there was a story that, in fact, that's one of the articles from it, literally went viral. I think it was earlier this year, and it popped up in little newspapers in villages in England. Someone sent me cutting and so on. But it's a site that isn't well known in South Africa. Next slide, please. The story of fire at Wonderwerk Cave is another story which went viral. There were papers in PNAS and Nature which announced the evidence of fire at about 1 million years ago. And in fact, it may even go back further. And this again was the earliest evidence of habitual use of fire by human ancestors on Earth. These kinds of claims can sometimes be superseded as other research happens, but this site is right up there amongst the really significant sites on Earth. So far, light from Africa to cite the Solplaatje University motto. Next slide, please. In terms of paleoclimates, the site is very important for evidence of various kinds. I mentioned a few at the bottom there, sediment analysis, carbon isotopes, and so on. But one of the really intriguing bits of evidence is that there are places in the cave where owls have flown in over thousands of years and perched in one particular spot, dropping their pellets into the sediments. And with time, so the layers of pellets just pile up. And if you then study the species mix in each of those layers, you can see, as is shown in that graph, you can see the species mixes change due to changing environment, changing climate. And so that's just one of the ways in which we can use this site to track past climate change and to get a sense of how things might change in the future. Next slide, please. Rock art. The site is very important for some engraved stones, such as in the top left picture there, that occur in the deposit, and then also near the entrance and within the area where daylight falls on the cave walls, we have rock paintings. Next slide, please. Rock paintings are a way in which rock art generally, a way in which people have kind of created worlds, created new worlds, created meaning. Sometimes we think responding to power of place, and there are all sorts of other kinds of motivations for rock art. But what's unique about this particular site is that these finger paintings, such as the one in the top left there, these kind of geometric patterns are very common in rock shelters in the Kuruman Hills and the Dark Escarpment and other places in the Northern Cape, even in the Mackerland. There's a place called Keinaus, and there are other sites as well. These finger paintings with geometric patterns. Wonderwerk Cave has animal images as well, and is unique in that respect in this region. So that's something that kind of signals that this place was special in some kind of way. Next slide, please. So I'm going on to talk about the third site, which is Driekopseiland, which has also been argued to have been a powerful place that drew people to make particular kinds of images, in this case rock engravings. I've called it placed with the rain's magic power, and I'll explain that in a little while. So this is an engraving site on a spread of glacial pavement that's been exposed in the bed of the river. It's different from many other sites in the region, which are on hilltops. So one has this diversity of emplacement of rock engravings, and I'll talk a bit more about that next, please. So this is the kind of imagery that one gets there. About 90% of the engravings are these geometric designs, 3,500 images. For those of you who've been to Wildbeest Hill yesterday, you can see there's obviously quite a contrast, not only in terms of the content, but also the placement of the site. This is in a riverbed as opposed to on the hill. Next slide, please. Now, much of the writing about Driekopseiland has invoked the idea of ethnicity to explain the distinctive imagery. So the argument would be that your animal engravings on hilltops are perhaps hunter-gatherer, San, and these, which are very different, some other ethnic group. The various ideas have been suggested, Khoi, Korana, and so there's the sense of quite distinct traditions linked to ethnicity. But there's a different history that may be told, which is not simply in terms of these cultural taxonomies, which kind of imply a passive relation in which people and things reflect anthropologically constructed cultures, but in terms of active assemblages, as I have been arguing recently, where people and materials and circumstances come together to create some of the variability that we see in the material record. So typologically, next slide please. The typological approach ignores other possible significant criteria, such as the meanings of place. Would the significance of the place have an impact on what kind of imagery you put there? Is there significance in the emplacement of the images on hilltops or on glacial rock aligned with the flow of the river? Next slide, please. And where, when the river rises, the water flows over the engravings. Next slide, please. And I've put this in to show the seasonal flow of the rivers in response to the rainy season in spring and late summer, and to make the point also that that not only the rivers rise and fall according to the season, but you've also got the vegetational cycles, plants and foods and medicinal plants would be available at different times of the year in different places. You'd have the comings and goings of animals and so on. And so there's this very strong environmental rhythm that's going on in places like this. Next, please. And then it turns out that when one looks into the ethnography concerning water, for instance, it links very strongly to coming of age rights of young women, which also variously references cosmological processes, so especially the rain and rivers, the moon, the cycle of the moon, the phase of the moon, and it references the mythical Watersnake called Kwa in the Keinaus stories. And those stories are very much alive in the present. They're also alive in the form of Nochayametsi in a Setswana context. So one's got this, these ideas that are crossing over these kind of ethnic boundaries that have generally thought to be absolutely defining in terms of culture in Northern Cape and other parts. Next, please. And there's this marvelous story that was recorded in the 1950s of a Griqua person at Berkeley West, where he talks about the Watersnake Keinaus, and its leefplek, its living place, is in a Sekoi hut near Berkeley West. And he speaks about it as being stark, very strong, a groot bull, a great bull of snake-like things. It's the bull elephant of the waters, and it's very rich and so on. All these amazing elements to the story. Further down, there's reference to it having a blink klip, so a shining stone on its head. And also what's remarkable about this this recording of the story in this written form is that the author has captured some of the local dialect, as it were, of Afrikaans. It has many of these elements which don't come from Dutch syntax. So words like le draai, heise kop, meensgoed, le staan, heise vrouwgoed, which I think come not from Dutch but from Khoisan contexts. So I just popped that in reference to the Watersnake story that's being told in the 1950s in this area. Next slide, please. So then, just returning to the ritual, the coming of age rite that I referred to. This is a photograph of a reenactment that took place at Sendling's Drift back in the early 90s that I was fortunate enough to witness. And it shows the moment, these are old women who, as young girls, had gone through the rite. And it's a ritual reenactment, and they show the conclusion of that, where the new maiden, the young woman who's now come through the seclusion and so on, goes through a cleansing ritual and is given new clothing and beads, etc. And she's also painted. She's the woman with the white look around her head. You can see her face is painted, and this ritual takes place at the water source. And it's in this context that in a common context, there's one of the old informants of the 1870s referred to the young woman as being the rain's magic power. So that's where that phrase comes from. Next slide, please. So there is a close-up, and you can see the decoration on the face. Next, please. So the question that I've asked about Driekopseiland is whether this kind of ritual is something that took place at that site, and whether the engravings reflect the kinds of decoration that were made on the initiate's face. We don't have any direct ethnography referring to that particular practice, but practices change, and so the question is that a possibility for that site? It seems to match up with all the different criteria that we've been thinking about. Next. And then there's also, in terms of the kind of animist beliefs that are reflected in these ideas, there's a sense in which bodily experiences such as rites of passages can forge connections between people and places, embedding both the individuals and the places and the phenomena in the places, forging them into relational networks that link up persons and features of the environment, between such features and between persons themselves, so that human, non-human, and inanimate persons make for this idea of extended socialities in which the material world may be conceived as a co-producer of society. So the significance of places in people's lives and things, objects. Next slide, please. So those are the three case studies that I thought I'd bring today, around which one can have these conversations, in which the deep past, which is a remote time in some conceptions, can be turned around to actually think of them as giving depth to the present. So not a deep past, but a deep present in a sense. So the deep past, which is before history, and people talk about prehistory, and those are tropes that can be used to actually distance the past and to break connections with the present. Where this earlier history, the history before history, as it were, it can be made into part of our durational present, which includes the past and the future. And I've tried to show how the case studies indicate how findings have contemporary relevance. There are things that we can talk about in relation to all of these pasts, and that there are resources to hand for thinking and writing about and also through the Northern Cape. I'd just like to end with the last slide, just saying thank you to the organisers, and just highlighting some of those mottos, which I think are are relevant. Respice, prospice, past and future, Lesedi la Africa, light from Africa for humanity, and Saka Quincy, which is the Northern Cape motto that I would challenge politicians to repeat. Let it to know what it means. But it's also future-orientated, striving towards a better future. Thank you very much.